My name is Jay Weitz, for those of you who don't know me. I'm a senior consulting database specialist at OCLC. I'm here to talk about improving WorldCat quality, resolving to reduce duplicates, a history of duplicate detection and resolution, otherwise known as DDR. This is really a historical, not historic, but historical little essay, actually. What we now call WorldCat was unleashed onto the world on August 26, 1971. And yet, not until a dozen years later, in 1983, did we develop the capability to manually merge duplicate bibliographic records. At first, this was an overnight batch operation, but it eventually evolved into an instantaneous process. A 1987 user survey conducted by OCLC found that duplicate records were considered to be the most serious of 7 quality problems in WorldCat. And we can all think of at least 7 problems with records in WorldCat. That prompted us during the late 1980s and early 1990s to work with the Office of Research to develop the first version of automated duplicate detection and resolution, or DDR software. Beginning in June 1991, OCLC used DDR to match WorldCat bibliographic records in the books format against themselves to find and merge duplicates. The original DDR dealt only with books. It used a series of algorithms that compared 14 descriptive elements gathered from more than 50 fixed and variable fields and subfields. The 14 elements included cataloging library, that is the 040 subfield C, LCCN, ISBN, government document classification number, media or form, author, title, statement of responsibility, edition statement, place of publication and publisher, publication date, number of pages or volumes, size, and series statement. Additionally, there were a set of about a dozen or so what we called flagged conditions that prevented merges in situations that we determined to be too risky. Several of the flags resulted in the setting aside of all records for microforms, which were not deduplicated. Other flags took into consideration the degree of internal consistency within each record and between pairs of records, particularly discrepancies of dates, places, publishers, and edition statements. Setting aside the flagged records, the algorithms calculated a numerical level of similarity between records. Record pairs that were not flagged and set aside and had a similarity of 0.94 out of 1 were deduplicated. The retained record was chosen according to an early version of what we now call the record retention hierarchy, which considered encoding level, leader 17, cataloging source 008, position 39, certain values in field 040, subfield C, such as DLC and NLM, and other factors. Between mid-1991 and mid-2005, DDR had been run through the bibliographic database 16 times, resulting in the elimination of some 1,592,586 duplicates in the book's format. The original version of DDR was designed to run on the old Prism platform. How many of you remember Prism? Okay. Which was decommissioned in mid-2005. An entirely new version of DDR was needed to run on the newer Connection platform. So, in 2005, a project was begun to reinvent the DDR software for the new environment and to expand its capabilities to deal with all types of bibliographic records, not just books. There were also the intentions to allow targeted deduplication, to make it an ongoing background process rather than an occasional process that had to be run against the entire WorldCat each time, and to take advantage of technological advances since the early 1990s. The project involved rigorous planning, careful development, exhaustive testing, and extensive record cleanup. In May 2009, we put the new software into limited production, processing small, targeted subsets of WorldCat. Between May 2009 and January 2010, we processed about 500,000 records this way, resulting in roughly 15,000 duplicates merged, every single one of which was examined individually for accuracy. Each correct merge confirmed some aspect of our work, but even more importantly, we learned something from every incorrect merge. We pulled the records apart, fine-tuned the software, and retested so that each particular problem would not occur again if we could possibly prevent it. As mentioned earlier, the original DDR compared about 14 descriptive elements drawn from over 50 fixed and variable fields and subfields. The current DDR, now roughly a decade old, is much more sophisticated. Although this is an oversimplification of a complex process, there are now at least 24 different points of comparison taken into consideration. By my really rough estimate, I've figured that of the over 270 defined Mark 21 fixed and variable fields, data in well over half of them can figure into DDR in some way or another. Obviously, many of the 24 or so comparison points draw data from multiple parts of a bibliographic record and involve manipulation of data in ways designed to distinguish both variations that should be equated and distinctions that must be recognized. There are special comparison points designed specifically for certain bibliographic formats. Just as a few examples, scale is considered for maps, aspects of instrumentation and the presence of parts are considered for scores, screen presentation formats, region information, and color broadcast systems are considered for video recordings. Many of the augmented comparison points rely on the vastly expanded indexing capabilities that were introduced with Connection. All sorts of detailed analyses and comparisons of data that were impossible in earlier years can now be performed because now all bibliographic formats are being processed, not just books. Matching elements that were not relevant previously are now taken into consideration. And most bibliographic elements had to be re-examined within a wider context of additional bibliographic formats. Not only does the current DDR consider more comparison points overall, but the work it performs within each comparison point is much more complex. To give you just one small but typical example, in the comparison of titles alone, well over 60 different conditions are looked for, each one of which triggers its own particular reaction in the software. These conditions involved such obvious things as equating various ways to express numbers and equating ampersands, plus signs, and the word and to trying to account for single character differences in such geographic names as Lake County, L-A-K-E, versus Lane County, L-A-N-E. As mentioned earlier, the original DDR had a set of about a dozen or so flagged conditions that prevented merges in specific risky situations. The current DDR doesn't have flags per se, but there are several categories of bibliographic records that are exempted from DDR processing, and these include digital collection gateway records, which are identified by certain codes in field 029, subfield T, Scipio records for art and rare book sales catalogs, identified by the code Scipio in the 042 field, records for photographs, identified by either of two material types, PHT for photograph and PIC for picture, all records with dates of publication earlier than 1801, MAPS records with dates of publication earlier than 1901, which was determined in consultation with the ALA Map and Geospatial Information Roundtable, or MAGIRT, and finally records cataloged under any of 25 rare archival descriptive conventions identified in field 040, subfield E. In our work on both versions of DDR, we always tried to err on the side of caution, deciding not to merge when we couldn't be certain. Of course, DDR is an automated process, and no matter how painstakingly we have planned, designed, developed, tested, and tried to get on the right slide, no such process can ever be as exacting as a human cataloger. In a database as large and diverse as WorldCat, no one can anticipate all of the possible permutations of data that might be encountered. And although we are constantly making changes to our algorithms based on reports of erroneous merges, we long ago learned that every so-called improvement made to the algorithms has some corresponding cost. Sometimes a change means losing some otherwise perfectly legitimate matches. Other times, a change will result in erroneous matches in an unanticipated situation. Given the sheer size of WorldCat, the wide expanse of cataloging practices, and the seemingly infinite variety of errors that both humans and automated creators of bibliographics can make, DDR is imperfectible in spite of our best efforts. Thank you.